Commander Galliner, an aging war veteran, stood rigid under the scrutiny of 100 expectant eyes. His dark scales were marred by the scars of battle, a testament to countless campaigns across the galaxy. Today, however, he was not here as a conqueror, but as a voice of caution. The Council had convened with one purpose: to determine the threat level of a newly discovered species on the fringes of the Empire, humanity. The initial reports were promising. Humans were resource-poor, technologically primitive, and barely starting to venture into deep space. Most counselors were convinced an invasion would be a swift victory, a chance to expand the Empire with minimal resistance. And yet, Commander Galliner's expression bore the weight of secrets that lingered like ghosts in his mind. One of the counselors, Lord Velair, leaned forward, his blue-hued gaze sharp. "Commander Galliner, you have led campaigns against dozens of lesser species. And yet, you request that we reconsider the conquest of these humans." His tone dripped with incredulity. "Why, they are unremarkable. A species of bone and flesh, bound to a single planet." Galliner's eyes, dark and deep-set, moved slowly across the chamber. The silence grew heavy as he weighed his words. "I have encountered many species that fell easily before the might of the Empire, my lords," he began, his voice like the grind of stones. "But humans, they are different. They are a species of paradoxes, capable of both kindness and cruelty. You see only their technology, their planet, their limitations. What I saw was far more unsettling." A murmur passed through the Council, uneasy and skeptical. Counselor Imrek, a younger member with a reputation for aggressiveness, scoffed. "With respect, Commander, we did not call this meeting to trade stories. We are here to assess threats. If this species possesses no substantial weaponry, why delay our plans?" Galliner's jaw tightened and he took a slow, deliberate breath. "A mere weapon does not make a threat, Counselor. The humans have something far more dangerous than weaponry. They have the will to fight beyond reason, beyond fear. They are unpredictable." He paused, allowing the words to sink in. Memories surged unbidden to his mind. Images of human soldiers on a ravaged battlefield, faces streaked with grime, eyes fierce and unyielding. They had fought with a tenacity that bordered on madness, a raw, primal force that his own soldiers had struggled to comprehend. "Let me tell you of my first encounter with them," Galliner continued, his voice lowering as if afraid to summon the memory too vividly. "We invaded a human colony on the edge of Empire space, a minor outpost, hardly worth a mention. We expected a swift conquest, no more than a minor skirmish. But when we landed, we found ourselves in a battlefield of their making, littered with traps and weapons crafted from what we dismissed as primitive scrap. Yet they used those tools as if they were extensions of themselves, and every piece of the terrain became a weapon in their hands." The counselors exchanged glances, expressions growing wary. Galliner's words were painting a picture far different from the complacent victory they had envisioned. He went on, his voice grim, his eyes distant. "They call one of their leaders Demon. I never learned his real name, nor do I think any of my soldiers lived to hear it. But his reputation spread like fire. He would rally his soldiers even in the worst of defeats, pushing them to fight harder, faster, without regard for their own lives." Galliner's voice shook, an unusual tremor from a hardened commander. "I saw him charge a fortified position with nothing but a bayonet in hand, screaming a war cry that sent chills through my very soul. And his soldiers followed him without hesitation." Another counselor, Lord Rickon, raised a hand, signaling for clarification. "This demon, he inspired fear in your ranks." Galliner nodded solemnly. "Yes, my lord. I watched my own soldiers, the finest of our empire, break rank and flee. Not because of his weaponry, but because of his presence, his intensity. Humans possess a capacity for chaos and self-destruction that is unmatched. They do not see war as we do. For them, it is personal, and I fear that an open conflict would unleash a fury we are ill-prepared to contain." Lord Velair sat back, brows furrowed, processing this revelation. But Counselor Imrek remained unconvinced, shaking his head with a sneer. These are mere stories of savagery, Galliner. Our weapons could annihilate them in mere hours. Surely, you do not believe these fanatics pose a real threat to the Empire. Galliner's gaze hardened. Underestimating them would be our gravest error. Humanity as a trait I have never seen in any other species. They fight as if nothing matters but the survival of each other. Even in the face of impossible odds, they find a way. They adapt, and should we provoke them, they will not rest until they exact vengeance. This is what I ask you to consider. The silence that followed was a weight unto itself, pressing down on every counselor's shoulders. Galliner's words had planted a seed of doubt, a small but persistent warning. The counselors exchanged wary glances, each sensing the gravity behind Galliner's caution, but unwilling to fully embrace it. Finally, Lord Velair broke the silence. We will deliberate on your words, Commander Galliner. But be aware, this council does not cower from conflict. Galliner inclined his head, concealing a grim smile. I only hope, my lord, that you will consider the cost before choosing to walk this path. For once it begins, there may be no end. With that, Galliner stepped back, his shadow stretching across the chamber floor as the counselors began their deliberations. In his mind, the images of that battlefield lingered, a silent testament to the tenacity of a species that the Empire dared to call weak. The memory struck Commander Galliner with a vividness that defied time, pulling him back to the desolate colony world where his understanding of war and of humans had changed forever. The skies over the battlefield had been choked with smoke, turning the sun into a blood-red smear on the horizon. Galliner's battalion, armed with the Empire's most advanced weaponry, had landed with a sense of certainty. They were here to conquer, to bring the weight of the Galactic Empire crashing down upon an unsuspecting, underdeveloped world. The humans, they believed, would crumble at the sight of their might. But what they found was not a cowering, primitive species, but an enemy that fought with the ferocity of cornered beasts. Galliner's forces advanced through the burnt ruins of a human settlement, their boots crunching over broken glass and twisted metal. It was eerily quiet, a silence that gnawed at his instincts. He'd expected resistance, perhaps a few ambushes or scattered gunfire, but the emptiness felt unnatural. As they moved deeper into the city's remains, it became clear this was no ordinary battlefield. Every inch of ground felt like it had been prepared, set with snares and crude explosives hidden among the rubble. The first explosion took out an entire squad, a massive blast that turned concrete and steel into shrapnel. Galliner flinched, his senses sharpened as the chaos unfolded. From the smoke and dust, figures emerged. Human soldiers, their faces smeared with ash, eyes blazing with a terrifying resolve. They fired with makeshift weapons, salvaged from whatever remained of their world. But they fought with a cohesion and desperation that took Galliner's forces by surprise. "Hold the line!" Galliner had shouted, his voice carrying over the din. But his words felt hollow as his soldiers faltered, unprepared for the relentless assault. He watched as human soldiers, many of them barely armed, rushed his troops without fear, a wild determination evident in their faces. They moved like shadows, slipping between buildings and debris, using the terrain as if they had practiced this ambush 1,000 times. Among the fray, Galliner spotted a figure that would haunt him for years. Tall, grim, and moving with unyielding purpose, the human leader known as Demon charged forward. His face was obscured by dust and sweat, but his eyes gleamed with an intensity that sent a chill down Galliner's spine. Demon moved like a force of nature, leading his troops through sheer will and example, embodying the defiance Galliner had heard whispers of but never truly understood. Galliner watched as Demon rallied his men, his deep voice cutting through the chaos, barking orders that spurred them onward. There was a raw, primal energy to him, a ferocity Galliner's soldiers had no answer for. The humans followed him without question, throwing themselves into the line of fire, as if pain and death were mere inconveniences. And Demon was always at the front, a spearhead that drove into the heart of Galaner's forces with terrifying precision. At one point, Galaner managed to get close enough to see Demon's face, twisted in a snarl as he fought hand-to-hand with one of Galaner's elite guards. Demon's movements were fluid and brutal, every motion calculated to inflict maximum damage. He fought not for glory, nor for power, but with a purpose that Galaner could only describe as madness. It was as if he cared nothing for his own survival, and yet he fought with a skill and adaptability that made him nearly untouchable. Despite the disparity in technology, the humans adapted quickly. Galaner watched in disbelief as they fashioned explosives from scavenged materials, set traps with a cunning that far exceeded their supposed primitive status. His forces, armed with plasma rifles and energy shields, found themselves at a disadvantage in the narrow alleys and shattered ruins, where every corner hid a new threat, every shadow held a lurking soldier. But it was the spirit of the humans that unnerved Galaner the most. Even as his soldiers cut them down, the humans refused to surrender. Galaner saw one soldier, a young man with a wound bleeding down his arm, dragging himself forward, firing until his weapon clicked empty, then using the butt of his rifle as a club. The sheer resilience, the disregard for their own lives, was a concept alien to Galaner and his troops. They were trained to value survival, to retreat strategically. Humans, it seemed, had no such concept. They fought as if each one was willing to die, so long as the next step in the battle was won. As the hours wore on, Galaner's forces dwindled, and fear began to settle in. His soldiers, seasoned veterans of countless campaigns, were retreating in disarray, losing ground to what they had thought would be a minor threat. Galaner called for reinforcements, but even as fresh troops arrived, the human resistance only seemed to grow fiercer. The humans fought with a kind of unity he had never witnessed, each of them bound by an invisible thread of loyalty and purpose. It was during the final moments of that battle, as the sun dipped below the horizon, that Galaner realized the true nature of his enemy. He had encountered species with advanced weaponry, species that could manipulate energy, even species that could alter minds. But he had never encountered a species that fought with such relentless, overwhelming defiance. Demon's presence seemed to amplify this defiance, his every command driving his soldiers to heights of bravery and madness. Eventually, Galaner was forced to call a retreat, a bitter, humiliating order he had never expected to give. As his forces pulled back, battered and broken, he caught one last glimpse of Demon, standing atop a pile of rubble, his face bloody but unbowed, watching the retreating forces with a calm, measured gaze. Galaner would never forget that stare. It was not the look of a conqueror, nor of a man celebrating victory. It was the gaze of someone who knew that the fight was far from over, that he and his kind would be waiting, ready to face whatever came next. And as Galaner drifted back to the present, to the sterile council chamber far from the battlefield, he felt the same chill he had felt that day. Demon and his soldiers had shown him something terrifying, that humanity would never submit. Back in the vast chamber of the Galactic Council, the weight of Galaner's memories filled the air like an unseen fog. His words had cast a shadow over the counselors, who sat silent, uneasy. Even Counselor Imrek, usually brash and confident, looked wary, his usual dismissive smirk replaced with a thoughtful frown. The gathered leaders had seen countless species rise and fall, yet there was something about the way Galaner spoke of humanity that stirred a primal discomfort within them. Taking a steadying breath, Galaner continued, his voice subdued but steady. You asked me why we should hesitate, why we should avoid conflict with humans despite our technological advantage. I will tell you, it's because humans possess something we cannot quantify, something that defies logic. They have a drive that borders on insanity. He met each counselor's gaze with unflinching intensity, knowing his words could mean the difference between peace and a war that would scar the galaxy. Humans are not like other species. They do not approach war as a matter of conquest or survival alone. They fight for one another, for values that seem irrational, loyalty, honor, even something they call freedom. These concepts may seem abstract, even absurd, but they fuel their will to fight in ways we can hardly understand. Counselor Velair, the elder statesman, cleared his throat, his voice edged with skepticism. Commander, we are familiar with species who rally behind ideals, who fight to protect kin or claim territory. What makes humanity so different? Galaner's mouth twisted in a grim smile. I thought the same, my lord, but the humans take these values to extremes. They fight with a passion that goes beyond mere survival, as though the act of fighting itself gives them purpose. In the field, they willingly sacrifice themselves if it means giving their comrades a chance to succeed. It is as if they are hardwired to resist, to rise up when crushed, and to return stronger each time. Galaner paused, gathering his thoughts, his mind flashing back to the faces of human soldiers he'd encountered. They are unpredictable, endlessly resourceful. When one tactic fails, they adapt. When their weapons are destroyed, they make new ones from scraps and debris. Their tenacity is not rooted in logic, but something deeper, a relentless will that borders on the irrational. This is why they are so dangerous. He could see the counselor's expressions shifting, some showing open doubt, others a flicker of understanding. Counselor Imrek's voice rang out, cutting through the thickening tension. But surely, Commander, this will to fight cannot withstand our technological might. A single armada could decimate them from orbit. They may be stubborn, but they are not invincible. Galaner's expression hardened. True, but the humans do not need to be invincible. They need only to endure. I have seen them resist forces that would annihilate any other species. I watched my own soldiers, who had survived countless campaigns, break under the strain of fighting these humans. Because when humans fight, they make it personal. They are driven by an intensity that bleeds into every skirmish, every ambush. They become the war itself. A hushed silence settled over the chamber. Counselor Rickon, a younger leader who had been listening intently, leaned forward, his voice softer than the rest. You speak of humans as though they are not just soldiers, but zealots. Galaner nodded. In a sense, they are. But their fervor isn't religious. It is something even harder to predict. I saw it in their leader, the one they called Demon. He inspired his men to fight as if their souls depended on it, pushing them beyond exhaustion, beyond fear. He led with a fierce loyalty, and they followed him with a devotion that was unsettling. The counselors shifted in their seats, exchanging uneasy glances. Galaner knew he was asking them to see beyond statistics and data, to recognize an intangible threat. He sensed their reluctance, but he pressed on, hoping his words would pierce their skepticism. What makes humans so dangerous is that they can find strength in suffering. While other species would falter or lose hope, they thrive in adversity. It's as if hardship fuels them. When they face death, it only strengthens their resolve. This is what I learned from fighting them. Humans are willing to risk everything, even their own lives, if it means standing for something they believe in. Counselor Velair's gaze grew thoughtful, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. And you believe that this madness, as you call it, would continue even if they face extinction? Galaner nodded solemnly. I have no doubt. If we push them to the brink, they will fight with everything they have, and they will make it their mission to resist until their last breath. And should they survive, they will remember. They will never forget the species that tried to subjugate them. Humans do not forgive easily, nor do they surrender. The chamber fell silent once more. The weight of Galaner's words settled over the counselors, each wrestling with the implications. Galaner could sense the creeping doubt taking root, the faint but growing unease that perhaps this time conquest might come at too great a cost. He glanced around the room, his gaze lingering on each of the counselors in turn. I speak not from fear, but from respect. Humanity is like no species we have ever encountered. Their very nature makes them resilient beyond reason, relentless beyond logic. To provoke them would be to spark a war that could consume us all. Lord Velair shifted, his voice a murmur. "You ask us to believe that their resilience, their, what did you call it? Collective madness makes them a match for the Empire." Gallagher inclined his head, his expression solemn. "Yes, my lord. It is not their technology, nor their numbers, but their spirit that makes them formidable. They are a force unto themselves, and to underestimate them would be the gravest error. I urge you to consider this before we take any action, for once we provoke them, they will become a nightmare from which we may never wake." Gallagher's words hung in the still air, leaving a quiet tension that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. The counselors sat in contemplative silence, caught between their duty and a growing sense of dread. And as Gallagher looked around the room, he saw that some of them, at least, were beginning to understand the true gravity of his warning. The council chamber was tense, the air thick with the weight of Gallagher's words. The counselors sat in silence, each lost in thought, contemplating the implications of facing a species so volatile and resilient. The idea of humans as more than just another primitive race to be conquered, as a force capable of resisting the might of the Galactic Empire, was difficult for many of them to accept. And yet, Gallagher's voice held the weight of experience, the authority of a commander who had seen firsthand the chaos humanity could unleash. Finally, Lord Velair broke the silence, his voice measured but troubled. "Commander Gallagher, your account is compelling. However, we are the Empire, the pinnacle of power in this galaxy. To allow one species, no matter how tenacious, to deter our expansionist goals would be unprecedented." He glanced at his fellow counselors, searching for agreement. "We cannot allow fear or even caution to dictate our decisions. Our objective is to bring order and unity to the galaxy, and that often requires force." Gallagher met Velair's gaze, his expression one of barely restrained frustration. "This is not a matter of fear, my lord. It is a matter of survival. Humanity does not seek conquest, but if we provoke them, they will turn the war into something personal. They will resist with everything they have, and they will drag us into a conflict that could last generations. If they are pushed to the edge, they will fight until there is nothing left of themselves or us." Counselor Imrek, his eyes narrowed, spoke up, his voice cold. "And what would you have us do, Commander? Allow them to thrive unchecked? Permit them to challenge our authority at every turn? That is a weakness we cannot afford. If we avoid conflict now, what's to stop them from expanding, from becoming a threat we cannot contain later?" Gallagher straightened, his voice steady but forceful. "Humans value autonomy, Counselor. They crave freedom, not conquest. They do not wish to control the galaxy, only to be left in peace. If we approach them diplomatically, show them that we do not intend to crush their way of life, they may become allies rather than enemies." Counselor Rickon, who had remained quiet through much of the exchange, finally spoke, his voice thoughtful. "An alliance, you say? Humans, allies of the Empire." His gaze turned contemplative, and a ripple of murmurs spread through the chamber as others considered the possibility. It would be unprecedented. Yes, but perhaps it would be wiser to forge a partnership with them than to risk igniting a war we may not easily win. Imrek scoffed, clearly displeased. "An alliance with savages who barely understand space travel? What would we stand to gain?" Gallagher's gaze hardened. "More than you realize. Humans are adaptable and innovative, capable of rapid advancement. Their creativity is unmatched, and given time, they will grow into a formidable force. If we reach out now, we have the chance to shape that growth, to guide it toward a mutually beneficial future. But if we force them into war, they will remember for generations. They will never forgive us." The counselors looked to one another, their expressions a mixture of doubt and contemplation. The concept of coexistence with a lesser species went against the very foundation of the Empire's principles, and yet Gallagher's words had stirred a seed of doubt. Lord Velair raised a hand, silencing the murmurs. "We cannot ignore the potential threat humanity poses. Yet it would be unwise to underestimate them. Commander Gallagher, if we send an envoy to negotiate, Will you vouch for humanity's willingness to stand down, to coexist? Galaner's gaze softened, relief evident in his expression. Yes, my lord. I believe that if we approach with respect, without aggression, they will respond in kind. They do not seek dominance, only survival. Offer them the chance, and they may yet choose peace over war. Counselor Imrek's face twisted with distaste, but he held his tongue. The council's silence signaled a growing consensus, an unspoken agreement to explore this diplomatic avenue, however reluctantly. Velair addressed the council, his voice clear. Very well. We shall convene an envoy to make contact with the humans under terms of peace. Commander Galaner, you will lead this envoy, and you will serve as our representative, for it is your experience with humanity that has guided us to this decision. If peace can be achieved, we will achieve it. Galaner bowed his head, the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Thank you, my lord. I will do everything in my power to prevent this from becoming the war we all fear. Velair nodded, a hint of approval in his gaze. But before he could dismiss the council, Counselor Imrek rose, his voice slicing through the chamber like a blade. I hope your optimism is not misplaced, Commander. But mark my words, if your diplomacy fails, if these humans prove as volatile as you claim, it will be your head on the line. We will not tolerate insubordination in the face of conquest. Galaner met Imrek's gaze, his face calm. If it comes to that, Counselor, I will accept whatever consequences you see fit. But know this, should we provoke them, we will face an enemy unlike any we have ever encountered, and we may not have the luxury of a second chance. Imrek's eyes flashed with disdain, but he held his peace, resuming his seat with a barely concealed sneer. Velair signaled the end of the council meeting, and the councilors began to disperse, each caught in their own thoughts. As Galaner turned to leave, he felt a strange sense of foreboding, a chill that lingered despite the decision for peace. Outside the council chamber, he glanced at the stars through a towering window, his mind heavy with the burden of what lay ahead. He had offered his warning, shared what he had learned in the field, but whether the council truly understood remained to be seen. He knew humanity well enough to know they would defend their freedom at any cost. As he stood alone, a single, unwavering thought surfaced, echoing through his mind. This encounter, whether peaceful or violent, would mark the beginning of something far greater than any single battle. And in that quiet moment, he knew that his path and the fate of two civilizations had been set. Turning away from the stars, Galaner prepared himself for the journey ahead, a final hope that diplomacy would triumph over bloodshed holding steady within him.